November 30th, 1939, 0 hours, 0 minutes. Along a front line stretching 1,340 kilometers from the Gulf of Finland to the Arctic Ocean, the Soviet Union opens fire. It is not yet light. It will not be light for hours. The Red Army is the largest land force on Earth, and it moves now. 4 armies, more than 450,000 soldiers in the initial wave, 6,000 artillery pieces, 1,500 tanks, 900 aircraft. All of it aimed at a nation of 3.7 million people that has no meaningful air force, no tank force worth describing, and reserves of artillery ammunition that, by Finnish General Staff calculations, will last approximately 3 weeks of sustained combat. The operational plan filed with the Leningrad Military District estimates 12 days to reach Helsinki. Some Soviet officers, by later accounts, pack dress uniforms for the victory parade. The forest does not know any of this. The Karelian forest in late November is not a landscape in any sense that a soldier from central Russia or the plains of Ukraine would recognize. It is not a woodland through which armies pass. It is a system, ancient, absolute, and hostile to anything that does not belong to it. The trees are pine and spruce, most of them a century old or older, growing so close together in the interior that at noon on a clear day, the light on the forest floor is the light of deep dusk. The undergrowth between the trunks is scrub brush and deadfall that has not been cleared in living memory. The ground beneath the snow is rock, Precambrian granite, the oldest surface geology in Europe, and the granite is not flat. It tilts and rises and fractures into ridges and depressions that the snow covers uniformly, hiding everything. Frozen lakes appear without warning at the ends of narrow corridors through the trees. There are no roads in the military sense. There are logging tracks, most of them wide enough for a single horse-drawn cart. There is the ice. There is the dark. In late November, the temperature in the interior is -20 Celsius during the day. At night, in the weeks ahead, it will fall to -40. The men of the Soviet 18th Rifle Division cross the border at 800 on the morning of November 30th, 1939, into this forest, and they do not come back out. To understand what happens to them, to understand why 4 in every 5 Soviet soldiers who enter the deep Karelian forests in the winter of 1939 never return, it is necessary to understand 2 things simultaneously: what the Soviet army is, and what is waiting for it on the other side of the border. These are not simply a large army and a small army. They are 2 entirely different relationships to the same physical world. One of them knows the forest. The other has never imagined anything like it. The Red Army that mobilizes in November 1939 is, on paper, one of the most formidable military organizations in human history. It has been building for 20 years under the doctrine of deep battle, a theory of combined arms warfare developed through the 1930s by some of the most innovative military thinkers of the century. Theorists who argued that future wars would be won not by attrition but by simultaneous deep strikes at every level of an enemy's operational structure, paralyzing command, severing supply, and collapsing the enemy's ability to respond before it could adapt. The theory is sound. In certain conditions, on certain terrain, against certain opponents, it would prove devastatingly effective in the years ahead. In the Karelian forest in November 1939, it is worth nothing. The reason is the purges. Between 1937 and 1938, Stalin's NKVD arrested, imprisoned, or executed approximately 35,000 Red Army officers. 3 of the 5 marshals of the Soviet Union were shot. 13 of 15 army commanders were arrested, most of them killed. 50 of 57 corps commanders were purged. 154 of 186 division commanders disappeared into the system. The men who survived, the men now leading divisions and armies into Finland, survived because they had not stood out. Because they had said yes when yes was the safest answer. Because they had not challenged orders, had not questioned doctrine, had not publicly disagreed with the line from Moscow. The Red Army that enters Finland in November 1939 is an army that has killed its own brain. What remains is the body, enormous, powerful, and at the command level, deeply uncertain how to think. The men themselves are not cowards. The record of the Winter War is full of individual Soviet soldiers and junior officers who fight with absolute courage in conditions that would have broken most armies entirely. The problem is not courage. The problem is an institution that, from the ranks of colonel upward, has been systematically trained to do one thing above all others: not be responsible for failure. In the Red Army of 1939, the penalty for a failed operation reported honestly to superiors is arrest. The penalty for a successful operation reported as in progress is promotion. The result is a command culture where information flows upward, distorted by the survival instinct, where reality and the official version of reality diverge almost immediately, and where the men who most need to understand what is happening on the ground, the generals, are the last to know. Into the Karelian forest, this institution sends its men, and the forest receives them. The Finnish army that waits on the other side of the border is a different creature entirely. It is small. Finland mobilizes approximately 300,000 soldiers in total for the Winter War, against Soviet forces that will eventually reach 600,000. And it is lightly equipped by any conventional measure. It has 230 artillery pieces of varying age and condition. It has no operational air force to speak of. It has 32 tanks, most of them obsolete. It has no strategic reserves, no industrial base capable of replacing losses, and no allies with any serious intention of intervening. What it has is the forest. Finnish soldiers in 1939 do not regard the Karelian forest the way a Soviet soldier from Minsk or Kiev regards it. They were born near it. Many of them grew up in it. The men called to the Civic Guard and the Army Reserve in the autumn of 1939 are hunters, lumberjacks, farmers who have spent their lives working in and around the terrain that is about to become a battlefield. They ski through it in winter as naturally as walking. They can navigate it at night by landmark and instinct. They understand where the ground is soft and where it is hard, where a frozen lake will hold weight and where the ice is thin at the current runs, where a man moving through the trees can be seen from 50 meters and where the same man, 15 meters to the left in a different fold of ground, is invisible. This knowledge is not trained, it is lived. And in the winter of 1939, it is the most decisive military advantage on the Northern Front. The Finnish tactical concept that will destroy the Red Army in the forests is called Motti. The word comes from the Finnish unit of measurement for a cubic meter of firewood. A motti is what you cut from the forest and then split into pieces small enough to burn. The Finnish army applies this concept to Soviet columns with geometric precision. You do not attack the column at its front. You do not attack it from the rear. You allow it to enter the forest, to extend, to stretch along the logging roads that are the only available routes of advance until it is long and thin and committed. Then you cut it. You fell trees across the road simultaneously at multiple points, front and rear, sealing the column into sections. Then you hold the sections in place while Finnish ski troops circle through the forest on both flanks, attacking the supply line, eliminating the medical evacuation, severing the communications. The column cannot advance, it cannot retreat, it cannot be supplied, it can only sit in the forest and die. The forest does the rest. The Soviet 18th Rifle Division does not know about Motti on November 30th, 1939. It is crossing into Finnish territory north of Lake Ladoga as part of the 8th Army's axis of advance, moving west toward the town of Pitkäranta on the lakeshore. The division numbers approximately 17,000 men with organic artillery, transport vehicles, and support elements. Its route runs through approximately 90 kilometers of wilderness, the Karelian taiga, on roads that are, by any military standard, not roads at all. Logging tracks, Unpaved dirt surfaces, now frozen and rutted, barely wide enough for a single vehicle. The forest presses in from both sides. There is nowhere to deploy off the road. The column is forced to move in a single line, vehicles and men and horses, all moving at the pace of the slowest element, which is the artillery, which is very slow indeed on these surfaces. The division's commander, Major General Grigory Kondratiev, has been given an objective, a timetable, and an operational concept that assumes the Finnish army will resist conventionally, will hold a line, be identified, be fixed by fire, and be destroyed by maneuver. He does not know that there is no Finnish line to fix. He does not know that the forest on both sides of his column is full of Finnish soldiers on skis who have been watching his advance since it crossed the border and who are now waiting for the moment that has been determined not by clock or calendar but by the judgment of Finnish regimental commanders who have been reading the column's progress the way a hunter reads the movement of an animal, patiently, precisely, without urgency. Kondratiev's column advances for 4 days without contact. The forest is silent. Occasionally, a scout reports movement in the trees to the flank and then reports that nothing is there. The column reaches its first waypoint on schedule. Reports go back to 8th Army Headquarters. Advance proceeding according to plan. This is true. And it is the most dangerous truth imaginable. On the 5th day, December 4th, the column is attacked at 7 points simultaneously. The attack does not come from the front. It does not come from a visible firing line. It comes from the forest on both sides of the column, from positions that Finnish soldiers have occupied while lying motionless in white camouflage smocks in the snow for periods that Soviet soldiers, when they later try to describe what happened, cannot bring themselves to believe. 6 hours, 8 hours, lying in -20 degrees Celsius, motionless, in the snow, waiting. Soviet soldiers who entered Finland wearing greatcoats designed for -15 and leather boots designed for European winter conditions have no reference point for this. The cold for them is an emergency. For the Finnish soldiers lying in the snow, it is Tuesday. Trees fall across the road at the front and rear of the column's central section simultaneously, and the sounds are lost in the opening fire. And by the time the Soviet officers understand what the falling trees mean, it is already too late. The central section of the column, approximately 4,000 soldiers, 2 artillery batteries, 30 vehicles, is sealed. Forward elements continue moving, separating further from the trapped central force. Rear elements halt and radio forward, receiving no coherent response. The column's communications, functioning poorly in the cold already, collapse under the combination of destroyed relay points and the organized chaos of men who do not understand what is happening to them. Kondratiev orders a breakout to the east. This is the correct instinct. But the breakout force enters the forest and encounters Finnish ski troops who withdraw before them, firing from positions that are never twice in the same location. Drawing the breakout force deeper into the trees, further from the road, until the men attempting the breakout are as lost as the men they were sent to rescue. The forest absorbs the breakout. It does not stop it. It simply makes it cease to be a military operation and turns it into a group of frightened men moving through darkness in -30 degrees in a direction that feels like east. The trapped central section of the 18th Division sits on the road for 3 days waiting for relief that does not come. Finnish harassment fire takes its toll, not devastating in a single engagement, but continuous, arriving from positions that cannot be identified and eliminated, wearing at the soldiers' nerves in ways that sustained artillery fire would not, because artillery fire is loud and visible and comprehensible and comes from somewhere, and this fire comes from nowhere. Soviet soldiers in the encircled section begin dying not from bullets but from the cold. Field kitchens are destroyed in the first day's fighting. Rations run low. The temperature at night drops to -35. Men huddle in vehicles with the engines running for warmth until the fuel runs out, and then the vehicles become cold metal boxes, and the men inside them begin to freeze. The soldiers of the 18th Division were not issued adequate winter clothing. They were not issued white camouflage smocks. They were not issued proper cold weather rations. They were issued what the Red Army's logistics system was designed to provide for a 12-day campaign expected to end in Helsinki. And the 12-day campaign has not ended in Helsinki. And in the forest north of Lake Ladoga, it is December and it is -30, and the men are dying of cold, while Finnish soldiers who have been outdoors for days are moving through the same forest as though the temperature is a minor inconvenience. On December 6th, the 8th Army sends the 168th Rifle Division to relieve the 18th. The 168th Division moves up the same road from the east. Finnish regimental commanders observe its approach, calculate its pace, allow it to enter the critical zone, and cut it in exactly the same way. The 168th Division is now encircled on the same road, east of the encirclement, holding the remnants of the 18th, both divisions trapped, both dying, the road between them controlled by Finnish soldiers who are not encircled at all, who can move freely through the forest, who are operating in their natural element, while two Soviet divisions slowly freeze to death less than 20 kilometers apart. The reports reaching Leningrad Military District headquarters in early December describe, in the careful language of Soviet military bureaucracy, a situation that has no precedent in the Red Army's operational experience. The reports say things like, enemy forces are employing unorthodox tactics. Enemy forces are not holding a conventional defensive line. Supply to forward elements has been disrupted. The actual situation, which the reports do not say, is that two full divisions are sitting in a forest, unable to move, unable to be supplied, surrounded by Finnish soldiers who appear and disappear at will, and the men of those divisions are dying of cold faster than Finnish bullets can kill them. The 18th Division is eventually destroyed, not in a single battle, not at a decisive moment. It is destroyed over the course of several weeks by attrition and cold and the accumulated psychological devastation of fighting an enemy that cannot be found, in terrain that cannot be understood, in temperatures that cannot be survived without equipment that was not provided. By the time Finnish forces formally close their encirclement and account for what remains of the 18th Division, historians estimate that fewer than 1,000 men of the original 17,000 survived to reach Soviet lines. The dead are in the forest, in the road, in the vehicles. They are frozen in the positions they occupied when they could no longer move. They are sitting against trees. They are lying in the snow with their weapons beside them. Some are found in groups, gathered in circles around fires that went out. The forest holds them. Meanwhile, and this meanwhile spans a different kind of warfare, taking place not in the deep forest of the north, but on the hard ground of the Karelian Isthmus in the south. A different story is unfolding along the Mannerheim line. Here, the Soviet 7th Army faces a different obstacle, not wilderness, not the chaos of unmarked terrain. Here, the Finns have built, over the course of a decade and a half, a defensive system of concrete bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, wire entanglements, and carefully prepared fields of fire that represents the full engineering effort of a small nation that has known since its independence in 1917 that the Soviet Union to its east is a permanent strategic threat. The Mannerheim Line is not the impregnable fortress it will be described as in some accounts. It has fewer than 200 major concrete fortifications. It lacks the depth of the Maginot Line in France. Its bunkers are not, for the most part, modern reinforced concrete structures of the kind that the French were building in the 1930s. What it has is what every Finnish defensive position has. Men behind it who know the ground, who have prepared their positions for years, who understand that the price of failure is not a retreat to a second line but the end of Finland as a nation, and who fight accordingly. The Soviet 7th Army attacking the Mannerheim Line in December 1939 has every advantage except the one that matters most. It does not know how to apply its advantages in this terrain. Its tanks, and it has them in enormous numbers. T-26s and BT series tanks and heavier KV-1s cannot operate effectively through the Finnish defensive belts because Finnish anti-tank teams working in pairs in the snow move faster than the tanks can traverse their turrets. The Finnish anti-tank weapon of choice is, at this stage of the war, improvised. They use petrol bombs, gasoline in glass bottles with burning wicks, thrown onto the engine decks and hatches of Soviet tanks by soldiers who have worked out through observation and experience exactly where the tank is vulnerable and who are willing, at enormous personal risk, to get close enough to exploit it. The Finnish name for the weapon, applied with the dark national humor that runs through Finnish accounts of the Winter War, is the Molotov cocktail, named for Vyacheslav Molotov, the Soviet foreign minister who publicly claimed that Soviet aircraft bombing Finnish cities were not dropping bombs at all, but were delivering bread to the starving Finnish proletariat. The Finns, in one of the more precise acts of nomenclature in military history, decide that if Soviet bombs are bread deliveries, their firebombs are cocktails to wash the bread down with. The Soviet infantry attacking behind these tanks is cut apart by Finnish defensive fire from positions its commanders cannot locate. And when the infantry stops, the tanks are alone, and alone they are vulnerable, and the teams in the snow take them one by one. The 7th Army's advance on the Mannerheim line stalls within days. By the end of the first week of December, it has advanced 3 to 5 kilometers into Finnish territory on the isthmus and stopped. The assault has cost it more men and more tanks than the operational plan budgeted for the entire campaign. It is at this point in the second week of December 1939 that the scale of the Soviet catastrophe becomes impossible to conceal within the military reporting system. Not because individual officers suddenly find the courage to tell the truth. The culture does not produce that kind of courage. But because the gap between the official reports and the physical reality has become so large that even distorted reporting cannot bridge it. The 7th Army is supposed to be approaching Helsinki. The 7th Army is sitting 3 kilometers inside Finland, losing tanks to men with bottles of gasoline. The 18th and 168th Divisions north of Lake Ladoga are supposed to be at Pitkäranta on the lakeshore. They are in the forest, in encirclements, dying. The 9th Army attacking through central Finland is supposed to be driving toward the Gulf of Bothnia, cutting Finland in half. The 9th Army's leading divisions are in the forest north of Suomussalmi, and what is happening to them in that forest will become one of the most studied examples of catastrophic military defeat in the 20th century. Suomussalmi is a small town in central Finland, set among frozen lakes and unbroken boreal forest roughly 800 kilometers north of Helsinki. In November 1939, the Soviet 9th Army assigns 2 divisions, the 163rd and the 44th, the task of capturing the town and then driving west to the Gulf of Bothnia. The route is approximately 90 kilometers through wilderness. There is one road. The road runs through the forest like a thread through cloth, narrow, isolated, exposed on both sides to the trees that press in from every direction. The 163rd Division crosses into Finland on November 30th, the same day as the rest of the offensive, and begins moving towards Suomussalmi. It moves slowly. The road is worse than expected. The forest is denser than maps suggested. The column stretches. By early December, the 163rd is approaching Suomussalmi, and Finnish Colonel Hjalmar Siilasvuo, commanding the force assigned to defend this sector, allows it to come. Siilasvuo does not have the men to stop the 163rd in a conventional engagement. He has approximately 11,000 soldiers, not all of them fully trained, some of them civic guard volunteers who have been in uniform for days, against a Soviet division of roughly 14,000 with organic artillery, vehicles and support elements. A conventional defense is not available to him, so he does not defend conventionally. He allows the 163rd Division to enter Suomussalmi. He allows it to occupy the town. He allows his soldiers to believe that a Soviet division is now inside a Finnish town, and then he cuts it off. Finnish ski troops move through the forest on both sides of the road the 163rd has been traveling. They sever the road behind the division at multiple points. The 163rd is now inside Suomussalmi, with the forest closing around it on every side and no supply line. The temperature is -30. The division has food for approximately 4 days. The Soviet High Command, informed that the 163rd is in trouble, sends the 44th Division to relieve it. The 44th is a better unit than the 163rd. It is from Ukraine. It is better equipped, better trained, better supplied. It moves up the same road from the east, extended in a column over 40 kilometers. 40 kilometers of vehicles and tanks and horses and artillery and infantry, all on a single logging track through the forest, because there is nowhere else to go. The column cannot deploy off the road. It cannot maneuver. It is a line of men and machines in a corridor of trees, and Sielasvuo does not wait for it to reach Suomussalmi. He leaves a holding force around the trapped 163rd. He turns the majority of his strength east, and he hits the 44th Division on the road. Finnish ski troops materialize from the trees at points along the 40-kilometer column that Finnish commanders have selected in advance for their operational logic, where the road curves, where the forest is thickest, where the ground on either side of the road drops into frozen marsh that prevents deployment. They cut the column at 6, then 8, then 12 points simultaneously. The sections are isolated. They cannot communicate with adjacent sections because the radios work poorly in the cold. They cannot send infantry into the forest to clear the Finnish positions because the infantry that enters the forest does not come back. Not because it is destroyed in engagement, but because it enters a darkness in which the Finnish soldiers move like water through rock, and the Soviet soldiers are simply lost, disoriented, cut off from the road, unable to find their objective, found by the cold before they are found by the Finns. By early January 1940, approximately 27,000 Soviet soldiers are encircled in the Suomussalmi wilderness. They are 80 kilometers from the nearest Soviet supply base. They have food for 4 days. They have exhausted it. Soviet soldiers in the encirclements send radio messages to headquarters. The messages are monitored and later studied. They describe men cutting flesh from dead horses. They describe officers who have lost control of portions of their commands because the commands have fragmented in the forest. They describe soldiers who are surrendering not because they have been defeated in battle, but because they cannot function in the environment any longer. Men who walk toward Finnish positions with their hands up because sitting in the forest in -40 degrees with no food is not a choice they can sustain. The Finnish forces cannot take 27,000 prisoners. They have no facilities, no transport, no food for them. Finnish soldiers moving through the encircled sectors find Soviet men who have stopped moving. Not killed, not wounded, stopped. Sat down in the snow and frozen. Men with ammunition still in their weapons, food still in their packs, who simply at some point ceased to find a reason to continue and sat down in the snow, and the snow covered them. One Finnish officer's account, preserved in the Finnish military archives, describes the discovery of a Soviet platoon of 24 men sitting in the forest near a frozen lake. Their lieutenant is frozen in a seated position, leaning against a pine tree. The men are gathered in a rough circle around him. They have been there for at least 2 days. They have food, they have ammunition, some of them are still alive. The Finnish officer asks through an interpreter whether they want to surrender. Several of them do not respond. Several raise their hands. Several simply do not move. The Finnish officer does not have the capacity to deal with 24 prisoners. He is 40 kilometers from the nearest Finnish position with facilities. He gives the living men what food he has, which is not much, and leaves them a direction to walk and moves on. He does not know if they survive. He does not have time to find out. The 44th Division, as a fighting unit, ceases to exist by January 8, 1940. The 163rd Division attempts a breakout from Suomussalmi when it becomes clear that no relief is coming and the 44th has been destroyed. The breakout fails. The division's remnants disperse into the forest. Historians estimate that approximately 17,000 Soviet soldiers of the two divisions are killed at Suomussalmi. Thousands more are captured or are recorded as missing. A category that, in the Karelian forest in January 1940, means the same thing as killed, only slower. Finnish losses in the entire Suomussalmi engagement: 750 killed, 1,300 wounded. The ratio is not a number that fits easily into any framework of conventional military expectation. The divisional commander of the 44th Division, Alexei Vinogradov, is court-martialed by order of the 9th Army commander immediately after the destruction of his unit. The court-martial takes approximately 1 day. Vinogradov is shot in front of the surviving soldiers of his command as an example. This is Stalin's answer to military failure. Not analysis, not adaptation, not an attempt to understand what went wrong and prevent it from happening again. A bullet, an example. The implicit promise that the next commander who allows his division to be destroyed by farmers in a forest will receive the same treatment. The effect of this policy on the Red Army's officer corps in Finland is precisely what one might expect. It produces commanders who are even less likely to report the truth upward and even more likely to report that everything is proceeding according to plan until the moment it becomes impossible to report anything at all. The forest north of Lake Ladoga in January 1940 contains something that has almost no parallel in the military history of the 20th century. The frozen remains of an entire army distributed across hundreds of square kilometers of wilderness in the positions in which it was destroyed. Vehicles stand on the roads with their engines seized, their fuel exhausted, their crews frozen inside. Artillery pieces are abandoned at the points where the horses pulling them died, and the soldiers moving beside them could not push them further. Equipment, weapons, ammunition, rations, medical supplies is scattered across the forest floor in the pattern of units that fragmented under Finnish attack and whose individual soldiers moved in whatever direction seemed possible until they stopped. The Finnish soldiers moving through these areas in January and February speak of passing through the frozen army, of columns of vehicles stretching for kilometers through the trees, of dead Soviet soldiers in every posture, of the silence that has replaced the chaos of battle, of a landscape that is now a monument to the distance between what the Red Army was told it was and what it actually was when it entered the Karelian forest. The silence is important. The battles of the Motti did not produce the kind of sound that military defeats usually produce: the sustained thunder of artillery, the coherent mass of a retreat, the organized noise of an army at the end of its strength. They produced something quieter, scattered fire from invisible positions, radio traffic that grew less coherent over days, and then silence as the encircled units ran out of everything and stopped. There is one road in the Suomussalmi wilderness that becomes known in the aftermath as the Rate Road. The Rate Road is where the 44th Division was destroyed. The column of the 44th Division on the Rate Road stretched at the moment Finnish forces began cutting it for approximately 30 kilometers. By the time the battle is over and the temperature has sealed everything in place, the column is still there. 30 kilometers of vehicles, artillery, horses, men, supplies, weapons, all frozen solid, all stopped at the moment the division ceased to function, visible from Finnish aircraft flying overhead in the clear, cold air of January 1940. Military attachés from Germany, Britain, France, the United States, and Japan are given or find access to reports about the Rate Road. Some of them eventually see photographs. All of them draw the same conclusion: the Red Army is not what it claimed to be. Adolf Hitler, studying the Winter War from Berlin with the attention he gives to anything that might affect his operational planning, draws a conclusion that is more specific and more consequential than anything the Finnish army intends. He concludes that the Red Army, whose officer corps has been gutted by Stalin's purges, is a hollow institution, enormous in mass, negligible in competence. He concludes that the evidence of Finland confirms what he has already suspected, that an invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, can be accomplished in a single campaign before the Soviet military recovers its professional capacity. The Karelian forest in the winter of 1939 does not cause Operation Barbarossa, but the Karelian forest provides a data point that Hitler uses to justify a decision he has already made. This conclusion, that Finland proves the Soviet Union is defeatable in one campaign, is among the most catastrophically wrong strategic assessments of the Second World War. But in January 1940, looking at photographs of 30 kilometers of frozen vehicles on the Raate Road, it is not an irrational conclusion to draw. The Soviet army is learning. This is perhaps the most important thing about the Winter War that is least understood. It is learning at enormous cost in the worst possible school by the worst possible method, which is to say, by failing repeatedly and catastrophically until the failure itself teaches something. The men who survived the Karelian forest in December 1939 are different soldiers from the men who entered it. They know something now that cannot be taught in a classroom or conveyed in a doctrine manual. They know what it feels like to be the prey in the forest. They know what Finnish skis sound like in snow at night. They know that the cold is a weapon and that it kills without malice, without discrimination, without the hesitation that sometimes stays a human enemy's hand. They know that a forest can eat an army. This knowledge costs them more than they can afford to pay, but they pay it, and it is in them now. The larger shape of the Winter War, the strategic arc that begins on November 30th, 1939, and ends on March 13th, 1940, when the Moscow Peace Treaty is signed, runs in two simultaneous directions. In the forest north of Lake Ladoga and in central Finland, the Red Army is destroyed, division by division, Motti by Motti, in engagements that will be studied for the rest of the century. And on the Karelian Isthmus, after 6 weeks of stalled assault against the Mannerheim line, a different process begins. The patient, methodical application of overwhelming force by a new commander who understands, as his predecessors did not, that the way to defeat Finland on the isthmus is not to be smarter than Finland, but to be heavier. General Semyon Timoshenko takes command of Soviet forces on January 7, 1940. He is a survivor of the purges in both senses. He survived them because he was loyal, and he learned from them because survival in Stalin's Soviet Union teaches a very specific set of lessons about what succeeds and what does not. He is not a genius. He is something more useful in the specific situation he inherits. A man of absolute resolve who is willing to spend lives at the rate the situation requires and who has the organizational competence to concentrate force rather than dissipate it. Timoshenko does not attempt to outmaneuver the Mannerheim line. He does not try to find the clever solution. He masses artillery. Through January and early February 1940, he concentrates 6,000 guns on the Karelian Isthmus, a density of fire that the Mannerheim line's concrete and granite was not designed to absorb. He organizes the supply system. He retrains infantry units in the specific technique of following an artillery barrage closely enough to enter Finnish positions before the defenders can recover. He is patient, he is thorough. And on February 1st, 1940, the bombardment begins. Finnish artillery observers in forward positions watch the Soviet preparation and report back numbers that their commanders can barely process. 300,000 shells per day, the ground shaking continuously. Concrete bunkers, bunkers that Finnish engineers built to be impregnable, that Finnish soldiers have defended for 63 days, beginning to crack under the accumulated weight of fire that does not stop. Finnish soldiers in those bunkers are not broken men. They are farmers and hunters and lumberjacks who have been absorbing bombardment for days and who remain at their posts because there is nowhere else to go and because Finland is behind them and Finland is everything. But they are human, and 6,000 guns for 11 days is beyond the human capacity to endure without cost. On February 11th, the assault begins. 21 Soviet divisions attack on a narrow front. The weight of supporting fire is greater than anything that will appear on the Eastern Front until the major battles of 1943. Finnish positions are destroyed, gaps are torn in the line. Soviet infantry moves through those gaps in waves, following the barrage, doing exactly what Timoshenko has trained them to do. The Mannerheim line, the line that was supposed to hold until spring, until Allied intervention, until Finland was not alone, begins to crack. And then it breaks. Field Marshal Carl Gustav Emil Mannerheim has understood since early February that the line cannot hold indefinitely against this weight. He has been managing a defense on the edge of collapse since December. His men have been fighting for 10 weeks with no rotation, his reserves are consumed, his ammunition is running out. The question he has been asking since December is not whether the Mannerheim line will break, but what can be saved when it does. He has been asking that question because he has been here before, because Finland is a nation that has faced exactly this arithmetic before, in 1918 and before that in 1809. And the Finnish answer to the arithmetic has always been the same. Survive, not win, not defeat the enemy on the field. Survive, remain. Be Finland when the war is over. The Finnish government begins negotiations in early March. The terms the Soviet Union demands are brutal. The Karelian Isthmus, the land between the Gulf of Finland and Lake Ladoga, including the city of Viipuri, Finland's second largest, the industrial heart of the Karelian economy, the land where the Mannerheim line stood, passes to the Soviet Union. The western shore of Lake Ladoga is ceded. The Hanko Peninsula at the southwestern tip of Finland is leased to the Soviets for 30 years as a naval base. Finland loses 11% of its territory and 30% of its pre-war economic capacity. The 430,000 Finns who live in the ceded territories, who have lived there for generations, whose families are buried there, who built the farmhouses and cleared the fields and cut the timber and whose children are in the schools, are given 12 days to leave. They leave with what they can carry. The Moscow Peace Treaty comes into force on March 13, 1940. The Winter War has lasted 105 days. The Soviet Union receives the territorial concessions it demanded in October 1939, when it presented Finland with an ultimatum that Finland refused, and the war began. It receives them at a cost that, at the time, no official Soviet source acknowledges: approximately 126,000 soldiers killed in action by the scholarly consensus built from post-Soviet archive access. Approximately 320,000 wounded. Approximately 5,600 tanks destroyed or abandoned. Approximately 900 aircraft lost. These are the numbers for a 12-day campaign that lasted 105. They are the numbers of an institution that sent its men into a forest without understanding the forest, without adequate clothing, without adequate maps, without adequate command, and without any realistic appreciation of what it would cost to fight an enemy on ground that the enemy knew and the attacker did not. Finland loses approximately 25,000 soldiers killed in action, 43,000 wounded. In a nation of 3.7 million people, this is catastrophic. Every family in Finland is touched by this war, every village, every farm. But Finland is not destroyed. Finland is alive. Finland remains Finland. And this, in March 1940, is the extraordinary thing. Not the Soviet losses, not the Motti, not the Mannerheim line, not the 30-kilometer frozen column on the Rate Road. The extraordinary thing is that Finland, which had no business surviving this war by any conventional military calculation, survives it. The men who do not come back, the Soviet soldiers still in the Karelian forest, still frozen into the positions where they stopped, are, in one sense, the most numerous testimony to what happened here. They were not, most of them, men who failed through cowardice or incompetence at the individual level. They were men who were sent into a forest by an institution that had destroyed its own capacity to understand what it was sending them into, equipped inadequately, commanded poorly, and killed by a combination of Finnish skill and Finnish terrain and Finnish winter that their political masters in Moscow had decided, in advance of any evidence, was no obstacle at all. They died in a fantasy, the fantasy of a 15-day campaign of dress uniforms for the victory parade of a small nation of farmers that would collapse at the first contact with a superior force. The forest did not collapse. It absorbed them as it absorbs everything, without judgment and without mercy, and it held them through the winter, and in the spring when the snow melted, Finland buried what it found. The broader consequence of the Winter War echoes through everything that follows. The Finnish example, the Motti, the ski troops, the capacity of a small defended nation to destroy a large attacking army in terrain the defender knows, is studied by every military power observing the conflict. The German military learns from it. The British learn from it, belatedly and incompletely. The Americans learn from it in ways that eventually inform their development of doctrine for fighting in forests and in cold. The Soviet military learns from it most directly, at most cost, and in the most consequential way. It learns that it is not, in November 1939, a competent military organization, and it begins the work of becoming one. By June 1941, when Germany invades, the Soviet army is better than it was. Not good enough to avoid catastrophe, but better. The work of becoming competent enough to eventually defeat Germany begins, in some measure, in the Karelian forest in the winter of 1939, where the lessons were taught at a price that cannot be fully accounted. What the forest is now is quiet. The Rajatie Road is a paved highway. Suomussalmi is a small Finnish town with a Winter War museum. The lakes of Karelia, most of them now in Russian territory, freeze in November and melt in April, as they always have, as they were doing when the 163rd Division marched past them in the last days of November 1939. The granite is still there, the pines are still there, the cold is still there. The forest does not remember the war. The forest does not remember anything. It is only a forest. But the men who entered it in November 1939 and did not come out, there are 100,000 of them in the records, and the records are incomplete. They are part of what the forest is now, the way the men of every battle fought in a forest become part of the ground eventually, the way the ground keeps what the armies leave behind. Finland remembers. Finland will always remember. This was the war that should not have been survivable and was survived. The defense that should not have held and held long enough. The small nation that stood in the forest in -40 degrees against the largest army on earth and did not yield. Not because it could not be defeated, because it was very nearly defeated, but because it refused at every cost to be destroyed. If this story hit you, like and subscribe. We find these forgotten stories every single day. The question that historians still argue about is this: if the Winter War had gone the way Stalin's generals predicted, if Finland had collapsed in 12 days, if there had been no Suomussalmi, no frozen columns on the Rajatie Road, no images of a superpower unable to defeat a nation of farmers, would Hitler have ordered Barbarossa? Would the evidence have been there to make him believe the Soviet Union could be taken in a single campaign? What follows from that forest, from those 100,000 men still frozen in those trees, is not just a war. It may be the pivot on which the second half of the 20th century turned. And watch this next video.